Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Holy cow, Brian, regularity, but the playoffs are on and we got to wrap up the round, especially when the Golden State Warriors do what they're supposed to do. So anyway, I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. As mentioned, we are here to talk the playoffs, and the nice part is that just keeps getting winnowed. It's very simple. We're going to wrap up the conference finals, the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson award winners, and then talk our prediction for the finals, where I am going to be both optimistic and dour at the same time, Brian. So, hey, Brian, let's say how you're feeling about the Warriors, and we will get going.
Yeah, I'm feeling great. That Dallas series ended up being not too difficult. The finals are going to be a little tougher, and yeah, that defensive battle we were talking about keeps happening in these rounds.
Yeah, we will definitely see what happened. Now, I'll give us some credit, by the way. Our predictions, we were right. We now, to be fair, we went boring. So for those that don't know, the standard methodology that we look at regular season, which isn't perfect for the playoffs, but it's not half bad, is SRS, strength of schedule adjusted point margin. The Celtics actually are current, well, are and were obviously the highest SRS team in the NBA at about a little over 7. The Warriors were pretty darn good at above 5. Now, they would have been worse than the Suns had the Suns advanced, but they were better than both the Memphis Grizzlies and then, of course, the Dallas Mavericks who got, in an unfortunate way, lucky with Chris Paul. Chris Paul getting unlucky in the finals is apparently something that's just going to happen his entire career. So we picked the favorites and we're right. Now, we were a little shocked, obviously, by the Miami Heat being very, very resilient. Although, Brian, it was chef's kiss. I was so happy about this. I know you saw some tweets about it where really Jimmy Butler channeled his inner Michael Jordan.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, that makes me so damned happy because I am a petty, petty man. I hate the 76ers and don't want them to succeed because of their front office. And we even mentioned on last podcast, one of the players I do like, it gets much easier to not like the team when the players you like progressively keep leaving the team. We really, really like Ben Simmons. We kind of like Embiid. We even agree. Like, I'm in a weird place where I agree his ceiling is MVP level. I don't think he has the consistency to qualify as being an MVP level player. Sorry. And we did like a lot of his like wrestling antics. However, in the last 2 seasons in the playoffs, he's thrown players we like under the bus. So I didn't like that. Of course, then the 76ers getting rid of, say, Andre Drummond and Seth Curry, 2 players we also really like. It's easier and easier not to like them. And just traditionally, I'm not a fan of Daryl Morey or Doc Rivers because these are names that, get a lot of credit for stuff. And I mean, Doc Rivers is the most overrated major coach in NBA history, I would argue. And, you know, it's kind of mean, but, as we just mentioned, we like Chris Paul, and Chris Paul under like Doc Rivers didn't succeed. It's like I'm fine rooting against that. So didn't want the 76ers to succeed. So Jimmy Butler basically just being amazing and going, hey, the 76ers just kept him. It would all be good. I'll take. I'm like I said, I'm a petty, petty person, but I'll take it.
Yeah, we talked about this last time. He reminded them of that fact after that series when as he was walking, through the tunnel, calling
Well,
them out for letting him go.
what's interesting is the player he called him out about was Tobias Harris. He said,
Yeah.
"You paid Tobias Harris over me," and that's half true, right? Like I've got an interesting tangent on the Warriors to get to when we get them, but and which we'll get, which is basically keeping stars and good players happy. But I've actually used this term. I've called it an Al Horford player, interestingly enough, because Al Horford was also really big in these conference finals. And the idea being, if you have a contender, it is okay to overspend on a player. Al Horford's the person I used traditionally just because he was getting older. And I was saying Al Horford is the wheels are probably going to fall off him. They kind of did it on Philly, but then holy cow, Boston brought him back. But I would say it's okay to overplay on a player like Al Horford if you think they get you over the hoop. Tobias Harris was such a player, but the problem was they signed Tobias Harris to that big deal before they had Jimmy Butler secured, and then they kind of like got a little antsy on Jimmy Butler and failed one of our 101 lessons. We talked this in depth on last show of like if you have a really good team and you have an above average player on your squad that wants close to market rate, just give it to them. Don't haggle, because all that can happen is they get upset and leave, or their price really goes up if they're not a max contract player. So, you know, I am a huge Jimmy Butler fan. He is a fantastic player. And, heck, making it to the NBA Finals, being one game away, being 1-3 away from the NBA Finals this year is remarkable. And by the way, we had a really good podcast with Ben Guest. We both had podcasts with Ben Guest. We will see. Mine got produced. We'll see if yours is out. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, Brian, that it's there. But if it's not, what I can tell the audience is it was probably one of the greatest podcasts you've ever recorded. I wasn't there, so I didn't even get to hear it. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I did. He's a Celtics fan. I did talk to him last night, so we'll try to cover some of that here on this show in case that doesn't get to get released on his channel.
Yeah, well, we're right on that right now. So, we can do one of two things. At bare minimum, you scoop yourself, which is kind of funny. And if not, we at least make sure it gets out into the ether. The Celtics Miami Heat series is, of course, everything you want. It's a game 7. It goes down to the wire. It's got heroics. It's got Jimmy Butler playing great. So much there. So what are your thoughts on that series?
We're gonna get to this, a little bit later for your article, but yeah, the story was, Jimmy Butler. I think even though he lost, he just played really really well. But why did Boston win? Their defense is just so good. There was just a huge gap in field goal percentage for those teams. Yeah, Boston and Golden State have had the best. Well, you were talking about how we kind of expected them based on the schedule. Well, what really happened was Golden State was the best first half team this season, had some injuries and kind of fell down, and then Boston was definitely the second half best team and ended up on top at the end in point margin, like you were saying. And they both did it with defense during the regular season. Now Golden State's healthier, and they're the highest scoring team in the playoffs right now.
Well, Golden State, I love this metaphor too much not to keep using it. I compared it to Ted Lasso, where they had Danny Rojas off the bench and Jamie Tartt gets benched. Danny Rojas plays, and oh my God, he's amazing. And they're like, oh my goodness, we are going to get 2 amazing offensive players to play together. And then Jamie Tartt gets traded for fans of the show Ted Lasso. Now with the Warriors, Steph Curry goes down. Jordan Poole steps it up. Steph Curry comes back for the playoffs. Jordan Poole and Steph Curry both play in the playoffs, and they both play great. And in fact, this is we can kind of talk the article. So essentially, the key point being something I love, something we've been talking for years on the show, Brian, is awards. Basically, the NBA is too stringent with awards. The NBA had the same number of awards for when it was an 8-team league as now. Now, it used to have, I believe, 2 All NBA teams and 1 All D team, and that has expanded to 3 All NBA teams and 2 All D teams. But that's only an expansion of 15 players, despite the fact that the leagues, over tripled in size. So we're like, give more awards. And one of my easy answers to a lot of these debates is if you had an Eastern Conference and Western Conference MVP, Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, a la baseball, when baseball does that for the 2 leagues. And obviously leagues get so silly, right? Because leagues aren't even geographically split, right? The American and National League, you could have teams that are in the same geography but different leagues, which is all sorts of silly. Baseball is a ridiculous sport, but I love it, Brian. Anyway, I reckon the NBA could do that, and they kind of did that this year, where they are now awarding an MVP for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference Finals, which is freaking awesome. Now, one of the things we noticed that I think we agree on is really it is following the has to be on a winner. Now, just so we're clear, that's not explicit. The way these awards happen is they are voted on by a panel, usually of sports writers, and the sports writers can use whatever criteria they want, which is kind of ridiculous. But sports is silly. It's wrestling. We say that all the time, so it's okay. But it was very clear when Jimmy Butler only got 1 vote. He really Tim Bontemps, I think that's how you say his name.
Yep.
Just good job. Like only person out east that knows what they're doing. But it was pretty obvious that they went with the best player on the winning squad. And Jason Tatum is I agree with that selection, kind of. We'll talk about it in a bit. Now out west, though, here's what's funny, Brian. Here's what's funny, and I think you've got to enjoy this. I argued that depending on your methodology, I used two, but depending on your methodology, you could say that Steph Curry should have wound up third as your MVP vote for the Magic Johnson Award or fifth, depending on what you went with. I'll briefly explain those. The first is just wins produced, which, pretty straightforward. The stat we used around here: how many wins players responsible for based on their box score statistics. Out west in the Western Conference Finals, Kevon Looney put up 1 wins produced. Jordan Poole put up zero 0.9. Steph Curry put up 0.6. That's very, very good. As we'll note, the top Dallas player, Luka Doncic, was only 0.5. So the Warriors look freaking great. And I mean, even going back out west, those would all be, well placed numbers. And even really well when we consider that, out east, the players that placed higher in total wins produced, it's because the series went to 7. So those 3 players all put up very good numbers. And the other methodology I went with was called game ball, which is if you look at each win in the series. So there were 5 total team wins in the Golden State Dallas series. There were 7 total team wins in the Boston Miami series. I gave the game ball, namely the best player on the team that won each game. And if you do it that way, out east, Jimmy Butler still wins with 2 game balls. Now, Robert Williams also had 2 game balls. That's where it gets interesting, where I'm saying you could put him over Tatum. Out west, though, your game ball winners for the Warriors: Kevon Looney, Jordan Poole, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green. So as I said, depending on how you slice it, you could argue that Steph Curry was 3rd or 5th in MVP voting for the Magic Johnson Award.
Interesting. I bet he got a lot of points though.
Only 2 players. So only 2 players in the series got over 20 points per game, being Luka Doncic and Steph Curry. And I even say this in my Substack articles. That's nerdnumbers.substack.com. I said, I'm not naive enough to believe. So as an example, the 2 players let's say, 3 ways I could have split this award. The way I would have just done it straight out is I would have said Jimmy Butler out east, he 1.7 wins, 2 game balls, or Kevon Looney out west, 1 wins produced, 1 game ball. Both of those players being the best player, both in terms of total game balls. Kevon Looney, tie goes to more productive player. Both players most in wins produced. Now, if I was forced to pick a Celtic as my MVP because saying, hey, it has to be on a winning team, Jason Tatum is a fine pick because he produced 1.2 wins, which is the most on his squad. Second most behind Jimmy Butler with 1.7. But Robert Williams got 2 game balls in his 1 wins produced. So I could make a very strong argument for Robert Williams as my vote out east. But what's worth noting is Robert Williams is very Horace Grant like. So let me just pull up the stats really quick. So in this series, he only got 22 and a half minutes per game, and he put up 9.2 points, 6 rebounds, 0.3 assists, 0.5 steals, 2 blocks a game. So it's and I mean, just for perspective though, on that shooting, his true shooting percentage, Brian, 78.8%. And as you mentioned, defense is the name of the game, right? Miami, you said all of the teams in the playoffs were top 6 in defense. Miami had the 5th best defense in the NBA this season, and Robert Williams was able to do that. So it's but I'm there's no way a player averaging less than 10 points and less than 10 rebounds a game is going to win an MVP. Now, Kevon Looney, less than 20 points, because I mean, you're probably going to go for a 20-point player, but he did average a double-double. I think he was 10 and 10 for the series.
He had some 20-point games.
Didn't he end on a 20? He finished out the series, which is probably what put him over the edge for what I would call the MVP. He ended out the series on a 22-point game, right? If I recall.
Yeah, the Memphis series.
So it wasn't the. Let me take.
Oh, he might have had it for the
I think
Dallas game
Dallas.
as well.
It might have been on both. It might be
it's possible.
The end of the series might have just come down to Kevon Looney.
He's a clutch player, Dre. He always plays well in the closing.
Yeah,
game.
He does the Vince Carter. It's over, right? When Kevon Looney wants to step up, the series is over. So let's give the credit. Yeah. So in apologies. That's the series. I wanted to look at the actual game stat. So in the last game of the series, Kevon Looney, in only 30 minutes played, 18 rebounds and 10 points. So not the most. Klay Thompson put up 32 points, looked like old Klay, which is very, very scary for super duper scary, right, for the finals. If Klay Thompson is even back 75%, that's tremendously scary. And against the Memphis Grizzlies, I do just want to see this really quick. Yeah, come on, Looney, 22 points in the Memphis Grizzly game. So 18 rebounds against the Mavericks to end it out, 22 points against the Grizzlies to end it out.
Yeah, and Ben, the Celtics fan, agrees with you on Rob Williams, the Time Lord. For that, the minutes point that you made, he was able to, have as big an impact as Jason Tatum in total in much less minutes. So, he was. He's thinking that Rob Williams' health is gonna decide the finals, maybe, and that he thinks his health is not very good. So,
Yeah, well, by the way, I'll wrap up my Kevon Looney. I had that wrong. Apologies. I want to correct before anybody in the comments corrects. It was 22 rebounds. So
yeah.
so that's still Kevon Looney is averaging 20 rebounds a game deciding game. So that's probably a fun prop bet, right? You can make on the finals. Will the game deciding game for the Warriors have Kevon Looney get 20 rebounds? I'm going to go with yes. I'm making that prediction now, right, Brian? I'm going to say so Ben, I believe, I'll steal his thunder, said, I think Warriors in 5 was his prediction a few days ago. Did he
Warriors in
keep it with you?
5. Yep.
Warriors in 5. I'm going to say in game 5, Kevon Looney puts up 20 rebounds. Going to be my prediction.
I'm not as confident as you and Ben are. I think the Celtics could go farther.
So actually, that's where I want to do a 180. So let's I mean, I think
you're not going to turn things around 360 degrees like Jason Kidd said in the media that one time.
That's a good. I mean, that's good. That's how you fool them, right? You do 360,
yeah.
they get thrown off, and you keep going. But so at least in terms of the conference finals, what I think is really really key there, right, is it went to Game 7, and I just told you Rob Williams was key, and that was with him missing what I think he missed a game, and in Game 7 was playing like on one leg. In Game 7, it was kind of lucky in that Rob Williams was clearly off, but pretty much everybody but Jimmy Butler on the Heat. I mean, it was very much the very end of a prize fight, round 15, or two boxers are just like out of energy.
Both those teams are really tired in that series.
When on Ben Guest podcast where we talked the now infamous missed shot by Jimmy Butler, Ben actually said he's gassed, and it's not a half bad point to make, that it's going, Jimmy Butler might be thinking, hey, if I get an assist, not an assist, a layup to tie the game, and this goes to overtime, we're done. We're out energy. So can I just end it now? And then the other, to plug that podcast as well. So go check out Ben Guest's podcast. I think he's benbo.substack.com. He also noted that Jimmy Butler might have negative association because of Kawhi Leonard. Because on the 76ers against the Toronto Raptors, with 4 seconds left, Jimmy Butler scored the tying shot, a tying layup, and thought the game was going to overtime, and then Kawhi had a triple bounce, that one of the most bullshit shots, but the first game winning, so it is the first Game 7 game winner, I believe, in NBA playoff history. That might be the case. And he did that on like one of the worst shots. So it's possible Jimmy Butler still had like a bad taste in his mouth. Like, no, I'm ending it right now. I'm not tying this and losing on a last second shot. So, but we talked that, but I mean, they were pretty gassed. But it's also key to note that against in theory, weaker team. So just as a perspective, we talked this SRS stuff. Now, I haven't done the analysis I normally like to do on this yet, which is to say, see the strength of the actual team in the playoffs, because we know this. In the regular season, teams play deep benches. Teams have to rotate out players for injury. That's one reason the Warriors are so misleading, because the Warriors have a regular season SRS of 5.52. But that's a regular season SRS of 5.52 with, let's do just a quick look here on minutes per game. So apologies. I'm going to go here. So that's Steph Curry at 34.5 minutes per game, Andrew Wiggins at 32 minutes per game, Jordan Poole at 30 minutes per game, Klay Thompson at 29, Draymond Green at 29, Otto Porter at 22. Those are the top 6, and Kevon Looney at 21.1. So no player cracking 35 minutes a game. And then, of course, Steph Curry missing 20 games, 64 total games. Andrew Wiggins missing 9 games. Yeah, because only 73. Jordan Poole only missed 6 games. So Jordan Poole is like the healthiest guy. So again, he was awesome. Klay Thompson missed 50 games. Draymond Green missed almost 40 games. Otto Porter missed 20 games. You go to the playoffs, every single one of those. Let's see. So Steph Curry has played all 16 games. Clay, Steph, Wiggins, Green, Poole have all played, and Kevon Looney have all played. Kevon Looney is actually interesting because he's only at 20 minutes per game, but then you get Clay at 35, Steph at 34, Wiggins at 33, Green at 30. So, you know, they're healthy. It's a completely different squad.
Yeah, that's been the big story of the later rounds of the playoffs is getting Looney in there heavier minutes. He's been able to really make sure the Warriors are a dominant rebounding team, right? But they're not playing any big players as we've been complaining about all year. But Looney's big enough, and he plays big, and yeah, he was the MVP in my opinion, just because he's a
Kevon
unique
Looney,
player for them.
28 minutes per game in I mean that, by the way. So I mean, this what's important about this for how I'm viewing the finals is if you look at the Celtics and say they're a +7 team, SRS, so plus 7 points per 100 possession on a neutral court, and I look at the Warriors and say they're a +5 team, then of course on paper you go for the Celtics, right? However, if I then go, hey, well, were the Warriors not playing any players they should have been playing? And Kevon Looney, he's been one of these players that we have just, I think we've loved forever. And you're the bigger Warriors fan, so I think you know this better than I do. But I think, health has always been just an issue with it.
That's right.
But so he's 170 wins per 48, 200 is star this season. Looks great. And it's worth noting early in his career. So for instance, season 3, he was almost 300. He looked really, really productive his first 4 years. But then in 2020, he only plays 200 minutes and looks horrible. In 2021, he only plays 1,100 minutes and looks average. So this season, he almost played 2,000 minutes and looked really, really good. So he has just not been healthy. But if he's healthy and playing 30 minutes a game in the playoffs, that is easily a plus like 1 in the margin. And then if we go over to the Celtics and say, hey, Rob Williams, who a player that we would say is definitely underplayed. I mean, I think he got 1,800 minutes total in the regular season. And let me see if I can get and we just mentioned per game, right? He was like 22 minutes per game in this last series. If you lose Rob Williams, that's over a point because he is actually, as I'm sure we both discussed with Ben, he is the most productive per minute, major minute player in the NBA this season.
Yeah, and Ben had a great hot take that I don't know if it got into your show or not, but he's thinking, maybe we should just rest everyone the first game or two and try to tank the beginning of the playoffs and get everyone healthy. It's an interesting theory because he thinks Rob Williams is going to go out there and play and get hurt again, which could make sense.
Yeah, well, so it's funny. The Warriors on two fronts have very funny stories with that. So, of course, Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant did exactly that in the NBA Finals, infamously 3 years ago, right? And both came back, both got injured worse and were out. But what's also key is, right, they finished their series against Dallas early. So all of their players had a ton of time to rest. Especially seeing how, for instance, Otto Porter and Steph Curry coming back from injury mid-playoffs. I'm not that worried that the Warriors can get their players to come back and look really healthy or look really good. So I'm not worried. There's an interesting argument to be made for cadence in the playoffs versus rest. So cadence, you want to stay in the rhythm, stay in the zone. Rest, you want to get healthy. I'm going to argue for the Warriors just staying healthy is what's key. And the fact that they finished their series so soon, and the fact that not only did the Celtics Heat go long, it started atrophying the Celtics because another player that's interesting. Marcus Smart is a player that we actually agree is a good player. This gets very funny because in a second, I think I'm going to bash him pretty heartily for some of his takes on like him shutting down Steph Curry. But on a permanent standpoint, we would argue that at least in like the last 3-4 seasons, he's a good player, not a star, but really good. part of the reason he's not a star, right, is he can't shoot worth a damn, and he insists on shooting. But that's how you get paid. But he was saying towards the end of the series, he's like, half of my body really hurts. And then, as we mentioned in that last game, Rob Williams played 15 minutes and sat down. So two of the Celtics' top players looked really injured, and they're getting 3 days rest, and the Celtics are playing the Warriors, and the Warriors got like a week rest. So I'd be a little nervous if I was them.
The rest time is a big deal, and we've been talking mostly about the Celtics injuries, right? Especially Rob Williams because he's the most important guy. But the Warriors do have their own injuries. Otto Porter, you mentioned. He's played most of the playoffs, but has been hurt lately. It looks like he's practicing and going to come back. The other two big ones, though, Andre Iguodala and Gary Payton II, look like they are practicing as well and are going to be available to play in the finals. So if one or two of those three players for the Warriors are able to be themselves, that's a big advantage in the injury department.
Can I be mean, though, and go back to Arturo's point? The reason that, so like I said, I'm going to be the economist on both hands here, talking the NBA Finals. I have no idea. The reason I have no idea is the NBA Finals comes down to the health of Rob Williams. That is a huge, huge deal, and we do not know what that is. Even if he looked like he was limping the last game, a conspiracy theory Arturo Galletti has had for years is that the NBA ceases performance-enhancing drug testing in the playoffs. So there are things that players can do, which is why players, for instance, like Dwayne Wade, who seem to be getting older and beat up and atrophying in the regular season, seem to have this bounce back in the playoffs. That's his theory. I'm just saying that's his. And it's not a bad one. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous in professional sports to say, how could any player ever take performance-enhancing drugs, especially when that's such a nebulous and stupid thing as many smarter people.
I mean, we've talked about Tommy John elbow surgery before, right? How that's a performance enhancer, but it's a necessary surgery. I mean, it's really hard to talk about that.
One of my favorites, former Detroit Piston bad boy John Sally, has said like LASIK's allowed, and I mean,
exactly.
You're lying here. I mean, as an example, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar started wearing goggles because he kept getting his eyes scratched. So it's like you'd be a fool to say that like having good eyes doesn't matter. So it's like it's very nebulous. So I also like want to avoid any stigma being like some players are taking performance enhancing drugs, where it's like, well, they're all taking performance enhancing drugs. It's just a matter of which ones are more legal.
Yeah.
And essentially, if the lens gets taken back a little, there's a possibility that players will go for it. And actually, Brian, I'll take this moment to get on the pedestal we always are, and I just want to reinforce it, is we really for years have hated lionizing player like sacrifice. We just always have. And I stick with that. We talked about that with Joel Embiid. And this exact thing where it's like, it is so disingenuous to say, how dare these players take performance enhancing drugs and risk their bodies, when it's like, yeah, but that same player like breaks their ankle and then rushes back from rehab, you're going to call him brave. So it's like, don't tell me player health is what you're worried about. And so I do all that in a roundabout way to say there's a possibility that if there are things that the NBA might say are no-nos, Rob Williams might be able to do them. Or regardless, he's a professional athlete. There's, it might be horrible. He might, shoot himself up with cortisone or whatever, which is legal, I believe. And, play his mind out in the NBA finals and win, and then never be the same after, which I mean, that's like a theory I've had and many others have corroborated about, say, Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas is a player who had a very long career, but like after year 5,
Pistons Isaiah Thomas.
Pistons Isaiah. Well, funny. Both Isaiah Thomases, right? Isaiah Thomas with the Celtics, he looked really good. He actually got an MVP vote.
He made a comeback this year.
Now, but I mean, when you say, but that's the thing, is like, if you talk comeback for Isaiah Thomas, you're talking like got back in the league and looked halfway decent.
But you want to talk about Pistons Isaiah Thomas.
But both of them, basically did have the thing where, oh my God, in the 300 minutes Isaiah Thomas played across 3 teams this season, he looked horrendous. Whereas we did say for Boston, he looked really good. So in 2017 for Boston, we actually said he was a star player per minute, and he got an MVP vote. And then the season after with Cleveland only played 400 minutes. He has not managed to crack 1,000 minutes in the NBA since. And as I mentioned, this last season with LA, Dallas, and Charlotte, with all 3 teams just looked horrendous. Injury just took him off the table. So it's entirely possible that Rob Williams will pull an Isaiah Thomas, and Isaiah Thomas did this with the Celtics. put his body on the line in the playoffs, possibly win them a title, and then not be the same actor. So that could happen as well. But that's all I'm saying is we don't know the health of Rob Williams, and that is huge. So I don't know what is going one way or the other. But the difference between looking at the two is if I look at the Warriors, the players that matter, and I already told you these, Kevon Looney, Jordan Poole, Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins, those four players, right, were the top four players for the Warriors in this last series. Three of those players are relatively young, two, and only really one of them, I would say, Kevon Looney has had major injury issues. So it's like, if you ask yourself, what are the Warriors doing? It's like their young players are getting more minutes and playing well in the playoffs. If I look at the Celtics, I'm basically like Jason Tatum, like in huge drop off, right? Rob Williams, like A plus, Jason Tatum B, Marcus Smart like C. Those three players are driving the performance of the Celtics, and two of those players were majorly banged up. So I'm a little, I guess what I guess I would say is it's easier to be scared about what's going to happen with the Celtics.
Yeah, for them to do something in the series, Tatum's got to be the guy. Even he has kind of been a B this year. I think he's been up and down, but he has been. I'd put him up higher in past seasons. So he's capable of it and still very young as well. So yeah, and Brown's got to get in there as well. So the Celtics' path to win. They got to keep the Warriors out of the paint. That's how they destroyed Dallas, right? They kept getting into the paint and then hope for the Warriors to have bad 3-point shooting luck and just, kind of slog it out. I don't think they could win a shootout against the Warriors. That's for sure.
Well, one interesting thing that could be very frustrating, Brian, not as, I was going to say, not as even any problem, but like just a classic. So I'm trying to find his pronunciation, but Idoka, the new head coach of the Celtics. So here's the key. This happened to my Nuggets, and it's painful. So for those that don't recall, the kind of small ball narrative that formed around in silly fashion, you told me this, right? The Heat with LeBron James is kind of where people started thinking small ball.
Yeah,
and I
before that, LeBron was either a small forward or a point guard, but then on the Heat, that's the first time he's officially a power forward.
Yeah, and I mean, it's LeBron James has the body of a power forward. I'm sorry. And Chris Bosh was on that team. They have a center. The same thing with the Warriors. They had Andrew Bogut, who is a center. So it's like, give me a break on small. As soon as you get Kevin Durant, it's like, there's no small ball, but whatever. If the Warriors play small at any point, which seems, small is relative, especially with like Draymond Green. He's kind of a cheat code. But I mean, if they do a Curry, Clay, Poole, tell me if this has actually ever happened as a lineup. Curry, Clay, Poole, Draymond, and Wiggins. Because, they played Wiggins at the 4 and they played Draymond at the 5. They do that 5. I could see that baiting the Celtics into benching Williams without health or not. And if that happens, that is a huge benefit. And that's one of their first upsets, which is against the Denver Nuggets, is David Lee, their center, got injured. They benched him not on purpose because they had to. And the Nuggets with my George Karl went like, well, we can't play JaVale McGee because they're not playing a center. We got to play one of our like backup small forwards to play small, and got lost. So that's another thing that I could easily see happen. I do not know. I mean, I'll just be candid. I haven't watched the Celtics enough to know if he'd fall for it. But I mean, Rob Williams, we've been talking about his minutes for years being too low. And the Warriors have definitely done the play a small lineup to confuse the other squad. And the cheat code they had back in the day in 2015 and 2016 was they didn't have any bad players. So even if they were playing small, they were still playing, Draymond Green is a cheat code because you can play him as center, power forward, small forward, and he's an above average player. Like if the Warriors play a small ball lineup, they're going to play 5 good players. A lot of teams, for instance, Memphis, if they play small, well, you're going to play Dylan Brooks or Jaren Jackson, and one of those players is horrendous. Well, they're both horrendous, but you'll have at least one horrendous player.
No, it's that is the preferred lineup of Warriors fans outside of the Looney lovers like me. They like that small ball lineup the most, and it does play together at times. It does depend what the Celtics do. If Horford's going to stay at power forward, like he has, in the past when Rob Williams is healthy, or they have ties in there or something, then yeah, it's tougher to play that lineup. They're going to want Looney to be in there more. But the player that's been getting in there for the Celtics, mainly because of Rob Williams' health, but to be a smaller lineup as well, is Grant Williams, the other Williams on the team, and he's pretty good on defense. I don't know if his shooting is quite there yet, so he's kind of a Draymond-like player, right? Kind of small and stocky, very intelligent and good on defense. Not quite there at the shooting yet. So yeah, Grant Williams is going to have to be a really good player for them, I think, for the Celtics to have a chance.
And you could potentially. So, by the way, the top lineup: Curry, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins in the playoffs. This is awesome. Basketball Reference does have regular season and playoff minutes, so that lineup has the most. But as I said, you just said it. The second top lineup is Curry, Green, Poole, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins.
Yep.
And those two are by far and away the two regular lineups. The top one has 100 minutes. The next one has 94.
Wiggins' rebounding has really been key to that lineup working. He's been rebounding a lot more.
So, I mean, that is true. I mean, it is painful where I'll say, I keep hammering this point, Brian. Wiggins is not worth the money, but he's been a good player for the Warriors. And that's what makes it so painful is you can't tell me a half decent analytics squad or front office, if you gave them $30 million or you gave them like the trade timeline that they had, well, actually, let's throw this back, Brian. I'm going to throw this back to you, and I actually want to give you credit because you've been on fire this last year on takes and stuff on the Warriors. Ever since you got cursed, I think you personally cursed Chris Paul is what I'm going to say.
Oh, maybe
years ago.
Others would say it's the refs. Like Scott Foster has a pretty good record against Chris Paul.
But years ago, when the Rockets were playing the Warriors in the playoffs, you basically said, "Hey, I think the Warriors' title window is shut." We're going to talk about that in a second. And what happens? The Houston Rockets have one of the worst shooting game performances of all time, and Chris Paul gets injured in Game 7 of the conference finals, and the Warriors go back to the finals and then manage to win, which is amazing. So with that in mind, I said, you cursed because since then, your takes have just been spot on and right. And one thing that you have said about one thing you've said about the Wiggins trade, and I think it's worth giving a lot of credence to this, is a lot of that might have been hype and lie, because the Warriors are it was well known they were going to trade D'Angelo Russell, and the owners are saying we had to do this for cap reasons, etc. And your take is you think D'Angelo Russell didn't actually have trade value, and it might have just come down to the Timberwolves. They might have been the only people willing to deal.
That's what it seems like, because it was well known in the media at the time that Karl Anthony Towns was personal friends with D'Angelo Russell and wanted him on the team. So that's why the Timberwolves were willing to deal and others weren't. But yeah, that I don't want to quote this, but I think there's an interview with Joe Lacob saying that the Wiggins trade is the best trade in the history of the franchise or something like that, which is, I need to get exactly what he said down. It seems a little hyperbolic, but yeah, it was nice to get rid of that Russell contract, which they made a mistake, right? So at least they fixed it right away.
I guess if you count Andre Iguodala and Kevin Durant as signings and not trades.
Well, the point is they did that a year earlier.
Technically true, which is kind of funny.
They did all that stuff the year before, right? And then they went with Russell for one season, and it didn't work out. And then they just traded him the next season. So, that was good.
I mean, what we've noted happened there, and I've made this point about the Warriors many times, is they never have a good plan B. They're a fantastic plan A squad, and when plan A pays off, things look good. Even some of the plan A's back in the day before they succeeded the first time, they were going after DeAndre Jordan in his prime and Nene Hilario, and that was chef's kiss, and it didn't pan out, and then they got Kwame Brown. So it's their plan A looked
humorous though, because he was a restricted free agent. It's the Clippers were obviously going to match, right? It was just never going to happen.
Well, I mean, and same thing. Like Kevin Durant, the writing was kind of on the wall that he wanted out,
Yeah.
and I actually am going to follow that up in a second. I think I keep teasing it, but there's a big topic I want to put at the end. But you know, Kevin Durant kind of wanted out, and the thinking, which isn't bad, is we're a title squad. We can offer him the most money. We're in a great location. Why would he go anywhere? And Brooklyn. It is really nice that the NBA has good ownership in Brooklyn and the Clippers now, because having good ownership in big markets is key. So, I mean, I could see them not, it was clear they were knocked back, and the D'Angelo Russell was like to make contracts work and stuff, and we thought was bad. And it wasn't a bad idea in the sense that the way the NBA works is if you're over the salary cap, you can't sign outright. So the only way you can sign someone is if you actually have a contract value
Yeah.
that you can trade. And their thinking was, oh, D'Angelo Russell is a player that will be able to trade for someone else.
That's right.
And that then that might have then you're right. Wiggins might have been the best they could get. And I still think they were lucky with Wiggins, because Wiggins improved so dramatically from Minnesota that, like, that's why I'm just like, I don't believe anybody that thinks it was a wise move. But that being said, Andrew Wiggins did turn into what I was calling at the beginning of the show an Al Horford player, which is to say, if you've got a title squad, which, in this case is Draymond Green, Steph Curry, oh my goodness, Kevon Looney, and in this playoffs, Jordan Poole, well, if you just have a fifth good starter, you are in such great shape, and Andrew Wiggins is that. So it's kind of frustrating where I think it was luck, and I keep stressing that. I even said that on last show, like, the Warriors are like the luckiest stumbling on wins team in the NBA, at least in recent history. And it's frustrating as an analytics person, especially someone at a site that has been critical of them. But I'll give them some of their due.
I mean, I'm starting to buy their hype a little bit that they're able to develop young players. They're starting to get a track record of it. Not just Wiggins, also Jordan Poole, also Kevon Looney. And these were not, super high profile players. So they have a bigger test with Kuminga now, right? And I think this is the reason why Lacob or whoever said it was such a great trade thought so, is because Kuminga has all this hype right now, and he was the draft pick that came over with Wiggins, right? So, yeah. But to your
I mean,
point, in
honestly,
free agent,
as a no, go I was going to give this because I know you were also on Kaminga. Below average player, as he's kind of playing big. He's listed as a small forward, but on the Warriors, he gets pushed up to a power forward
it's
just
going
because
to be
he's
a test for their player
he well.
development.
I mean, if he is a small forward, that's what's interesting is, so just to explain, I actually want to look at Basketball Reference to see what they say. So as an explanation, what we do at the moment at Wages of Wins Boxscore Geeks is we take players listed position from like Yahoo and Basketball Reference, and then if there are not an equal number of players in each position bin, we reallocate them. And that's just kind of like what you have to do for the way the metric works, because we compare to average, right? So there has to be an equal number of point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center minutes. I can see, I mean, there are some people that argue there are no positions. I mean, a few years ago, I combined the power forward and center positions, and my 2 cents I will give after doing this for years is the point guard and center position are so unique in the NBA and are still clearly defined. Center being the big guy next to the hoop, point guard being the primary distributor of the ball. And then for what it's worth, shooting guard through small forward, they're pretty close in production. So like shooting guard even through power forward aren't as bad in production difference in terms of average. Where I mean, I'm almost fine saying it. And power forward versus small forward is different enough. I wouldn't want to combine them, and I'm just saying that basically there is no such thing as positionless basketball in the current NBA. You might occasionally find snowflake players or snowflake teams like the triangle offense, or by the way, like I've said this before, Nikola Jokic is kind of interesting for evaluating guards on the Nuggets, because Nikola Jokic essentially is their point guard and their center, which is very bizarre.
You
But
ready
if
for
we
Nikola Jovic to join the league this year?
love it.
It's like an NBA 2K creative player almost, but
Yeah,
he's
I
a
love
real
that.
player. He's going to go in the first round.
Well, what I was going to say is if we talk about Kuminga, he is listed as a small forward. However, because of, and it looks like Basketball Reference agrees that I was going to check, is essentially just because of how much depth they have on the wings on the Warriors, Kuminga is basically getting played as a power forward, but long term that might not be half bad because what I'll throw out here is, for instance, Andre Iguodala is one of their primary small forwards at the moment. Andrew Wiggins. So it's like Kuminga in a couple of years, if he's a small forward, could look good. And he looked fine as a rookie. That's what I'll say. Is like his rookie numbers. He's not an amazing NBA player, but he's fine, which is all you're looking for as a rookie. So to your development point, that's one thing. I mean, for what it's worth, right? Steph Curry had like a triple jump. He was like a good player. He
Yeah.
got better. He got better. He got better. So, and I actually want to use that as a segue into my last point on the Warriors.
Shout out to Mike Conley Sr., by the way, a great American Olympian triple jumper and father of Mike Conley Jr.
I was going to ask. I was like, is that the same? Wow, triple.
It's actually
So
funny.
okay, so what is a triple? What is a triple jumper? This is a thing in the Olympics.
It is, yeah. So you probably can picture long jump in your mind, right? They just run as fast as they can and then jump into that pit as far as they can, right? Triple jump is they have to take 2 hops, and then the third jump they go into the sand pit.
And I am on YouTube at the moment, just watching not Mike Conley, but what the heck? I'm
So
watching a triple jump.
interestingly, in the early '90s, there was a celebrity slam dunk contest, and Mike Conley Sr. was a really good dunker as well as a small Olympic athlete.
So I am almost 40 years old, Brian, just learning that there is basically a Mario event in the Olympics. That is awesome.
Yeah.
It is. This
It's
is this is
great.
100% more. Like, I mean, if I was a better video editor and had time, I guarantee there has to be someone, right, that has gone over these triple jump events and like just inserted Mario sounds as they're doing it. That's a lot of fun to watch. And that was poor podcast etiquette on my part, because it's like, instead of listening to you, I'm like, I'm gonna watch triple jump. But yeah, that I'll give a shout out. I'll agree with your shout out to Mike Conley Sr. On the triple jump. But back to the Warriors. Same point. You're giving them a lot of credit for development. I'm going to give him credit for a very weird thing, and it's very hard for me as an analytics person, because we do routinely bash, for instance, some of their selection. Same boat as my Nuggets. They picked up, for instance, Nick Young. Interesting point. They were like picking between Avery Bradley and Gary Payton the second. You're like, really? You know what you're doing?
In
As an
hindsight,
analytics?
that's a crazy choice, right?
But I just read this today, and I'm sure you've seen this too. So it's well known that Gary Payton was cut by the Warriors. And I've actually defended that, saying he looked fine last year, but when they're getting roster spots, getting stuff, cutting him and then re-signing him seems fine, because it's probably related to some cap nonsense that has to happen. So I mean, I'm progressively getting less and less about defending billionaires about their moves to save a little money on multi-billion-dollar teams. I don't like it, but I understand it. I'll throw it out that way. But apparently Gary Payton got cut, and he just went up to Kerr and was like, I love this team. Can you keep me around? And that's what got him to resign him. And I will throw this move up there because Gary Payton was so good during the regular season. The Warriors were a 53-win team. Gary Payton was one of the best permanent players on the squad. So getting them into the top 4 in seeding was definitely huge, right? Like, if they had been playing the Suns, well, the Suns were still healthy in the first round, they could have been going home. I mean, that's one thing about my Nuggets, which was they went home really fast, and people were using that as an ability to slam Nikola Jokic's second MVP, well-deserved, amazing, best offensive big man in the NBA ever. I said it. And then people were noting after the fact, like, wow, the Warriors are really good. So maybe give the Nuggets a little more respect, right? So that could have happened to the Warriors if they'd had a lower seed. So hats off to Gary Payton. So I'm going to put Gary Payton up there with Andre Iguodala and Kevin Durant, 2 players that basically forced their way on the team, to the point of calling this team lucky. I'm going to steal a quote I used on Ben Guest podcast as well, called the Jack Nicklaus quote. The more I practice, the luckier I get. And what I will say about the Warriors, and we've talked this before, is there is something about their front office where players like them. And there is a lot to be said for that in a league where 1 or 2 star players dictate your success. And in fact, I will even give them credit for Durant. I've kind of been waffling a little on the Warriors' interaction with Durant, because, seeing people compare Steph Curry to Durant and saying, like, Durant can't get to the NBA Finals without Curry. And it's like, this guy left money on the table to join your squad. This guy won 2 finals MVPs. This guy came back injured in the middle of the finals, got even more injured, lost a year of his prime as a result, and has not been 100% then. What the hell are you talking about, trying to say, oh, clearly he couldn't win without the Warriors, when the answer is, had he sat his ass down in the finals and just rested up, the strategy that Ben is suggesting for Rob Williams, there's a good chance that he's healthy for the Nets. And, don't forget last season, they were a bad shoe on the line from Kevin Durant from going to the NBA Finals. So I kind of just dislike that. But something interesting is like Kevin Durant is a very cantankerous person. He's definitely very interesting. The burner accounts, getting in arguments with people online, kind of the behind the some of the locker room dynamics. So the fact that the Warriors were able to convince him to come over at all is actually kind of remarkable when you look at just how curmudgeonly he does seem to be. So the Warriors front office and team or whatever, right? Coaches, front office, some combination of something in the Warriors atmosphere makes players want to come and play for them. Even as an example, right? They waived or they traded Andre Iguodala just away for cap relief. He played well. He went and got himself paid on Miami. Loved that. Came back to the Warriors. So it's like that is actually a valuable skill and a funny one that I'll compare to like three major names that I'll throw out there. Daryl Morey in the 76ers, Sam Hinkie in the 76ers, and then like Mark Cuban. Well, not even Mark Cuban. I'll say the Dallas Mavericks. We've kind of noted that, at least according to some of the contentious stuff about the really bad stuff happening in the Mavericks locker room, the story that we are fed, and so the one we are going to believe, is that Mark Cuban is not as involved in the day-to-day operations of the Mavericks as has been led to believe for years. And I'm fine saying that. That's okay. But those three franchises have had problems with either being buddy with agents, being buddy with players, being able to retain players. Jason Kidd, as an example, hopped off the Mavericks. Jimmy Butler got in a fight, like we were just saying, with the 76ers front office and left. So it's like there is something to a front office, even from an analytics perspective, just going, when we do get these good players or see other good players that want to play with us, they actually want to play with us. And that used to, for years and years and years, be the Lakers cheat code, right? Like Gary Payton and Karl Malone going, hey, we'll play for you, right? We want to win a title. For obvious reasons, they want to win a title. People want to play for the Warriors, and there's something valuable in that.
I mean, I'll give them a lot of credit, their front office, that is, for getting their old magic back and bringing in all these players on minimum contracts that are just big contributors, especially, Andre Iguodala, like you talked about, but, Otto Porter, Bjelica, Gary Payton, maybe if that was lucky. So good job on the front office. But to answer your question, it's Steph Curry. That's the reason why people are attracted to the franchise. I think it was maybe Marcus Thompson who wrote this first, but maybe we're subtweeting. I don't know. But the biggest innovation that Steph Curry had was not necessarily his three-point shooting. It was being a superstar that will play well with other stars. And that hadn't happened very much in the past. So that's why all the players, come to the team, I think, is just because he's the one who leads the team.
It'll definitely be interesting to see because, for instance, another similar team was the Dallas apologies, wrong Texas team, Brian. The Sacramento. All right, Brian. If I was editing the show,
Houston Spurs.
The Houston Spurs. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, the San Antonio Spurs. And we had for years, we gave him a lot of credit, and then as soon as Tim Duncan left, a lot of that started falling apart. And I've heard won't name specific sources, but behind the scenes theory I heard was, when Tim Duncan was on the squad, Greg Popovich would essentially use Tim Duncan as like the example person. They're bad terms I don't want to use for that, but he would yell and scream at Tim Duncan, and Tim Duncan would let him do that, which would allow Greg Popovich to yell and scream, and we don't really agree with that, whatever. And that was kind of good because essentially Tim Duncan was shielding other players from it, as well as allowing Greg Popovich to communicate via yelling, which we still don't think is a good thing.
Remind me in Ted Lasso what his name was when he did that.
Wasn't it like Red Lasso or Red Tasso or something? Red Tasso?
Maybe.
And what I loved, by the way, shout out to Ted Lasso. We're huge fans of the show, and I will be hopefully podcasting with Ben Guest about a Ted Lasso rewatch. Yeah. But what I loved about that episode is there's an episode where Ted Lasso thinks, okay, to get the team to congeal, I'm going to yell at everybody. I'm going to be mean, and they're going to combine in their hatred of me. And there's a sports psychiatrist there, and she watches it, and she's like, I know what you're doing, but that's a dumb idea. And has it ever worked? And he's like, no, not really. So it's like, I really like Ted Lasso, both using the trope and then calling it out as stupid. But then right as soon as Tim Duncan retired, then that's when you saw Kawhi being like, I don't want to play for this squad. And LaMarcus Aldridge demanding out. It's like this
Yeah.
team that we thought was like, oh my God, they've got such great chemistry and players just want to play for them. Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili left money on the table to stay with the team. As soon as LaMarcus Aldridge hop ship to them, as soon as Tim Duncan's gone, suddenly the Stars don't want to play with that team anymore. So I will be interested to see what the Warriors look like in 5 years without Curry, to see if they do maintain a good atmosphere. But I mean, there is something to that as well, right? It is really hard for stars to play with each other. Like the Brooklyn Nets fell apart for that reason, right? Kyrie, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. Clearly, there was just some clashing there. So I could agree with you, but I'll say, like I said, I can't pinpoint the exact thing, but you're saying development and then team chemistry in terms of players liking the team. The Warriors are top notch at that, and that's why they're probably. It's interesting, man. Let's see. I'm curious. I'll,
The
I'll
way
let
I'll
you
put it
talk.
is they had two bad seasons of both of those things before this year, and then this year they've made a comeback, right? So yeah, next year we'll see how it goes, right? What's the trend? Is it gonna are they gonna revert to looking for the not so good players, or are they actually gonna get some better guys?
Well, I mean, what I'll give them credit for is 2 seasons ago, what ended up happening was, right, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson kind of went out of nowhere. Like that wasn't expected. And I actually do give a little bit of credit to that, in that it's really, really hard for a team to adjust around losing key starters when you're not expecting it. In fact, it's one of my hated things that people will do to like prove why, say, Kobe is great or whatever. Is they'll say, in this season when Kobe was on the court they played this well, but when he was off the court they didn't do this well. It's like Kobe was their starter that was expected to play 40 minutes a game. It wasn't that Kobe, like the team was, it wasn't that they couldn't have replaced Kobe, because we would call Kobe in a lot of seasons close to average. It's not that they couldn't have replaced Kobe, who was costing 20 million a season, with an average player if they were given time. It's that if Kobe Bryant goes out injured and you don't have anything in the cupboard, your team's going to look worse. And so that's like one of our issues, like on off as an example. So 2 seasons ago, when Curry and Klay Thompson went down injured, that was bad. Last season, they managed, like you were saying, pick up these players, develop them well, and then went on a run. And it just kind of, it's interesting. It was very much like the Celtics this year, where they went on a run late. But I think the Celtics started like right after the All-Star break. And like I think the Warriors had like the last month of the season, last month and a half. Last season looked good. So I mean, but you're saying like it is true, when the Warriors, like everything's firing on all cylinders, is when Curry is healthy, and you know can't argue with results.
I guess the reason I bring it up is the one thing I can never shake about that period of time is they were awful before the injuries happened, even when Curry was healthy. So what I'm getting at is the talent that the team has this year overall is more like those dynasty teams. And the last 2 seasons, like the cupboard was really bare, on like your fifth through 10th players.
Interesting. Okay, well, the good news about this, by the way, looking at the Warriors with Celtics, just on paper, by the way, I just checked this out. At least looking at the FanDuel Sportsbook, they've got it right. If you bet $100 to win, you'd win 135 if the Celtics won. If you bet $100 for the Warriors to win, you'd win 62 and a half. So the betting markets at least have it right. So if you're seeing this 538 stuff or ESPN BPI that says it's an 80-20, that's right out. 80-20 is right out once you get to the finals, regardless. But the betting markets are definitely on the Warriors.
Yeah, and the betting markets have to take injuries into account, right? So I think that's the biggest thing about it. So, they definitely think the Celtics are more hurt, but I mean, injuries could go against the Warriors, such to the point where you'd never want to say they're 80%, right?
Well, actually, and let's be clear, the way betting markets work in an ideal world is they're almost like a scale, where they're trying to keep equal
Yeah.
balance on both parts, and then essentially they just collect out of the middle. So the betting markets, I would say, there probably is a lot of fandom, right? A lot of casual people are going to be betting on the Warriors to win. But even that said, like if there was really sharp money, right? If a bunch of people are betting on the Warriors to win, like they are, and a bunch of really sharp people really thought the Celtics were going to win. They would probably sway it because they would pick up all that action. So
Mm.
that hasn't happened. I have one more point, Brian. I'm laughing that I was like, this will be a short show, but of course it's gone long because we love your Warriors. There's so much stuff about it. Last one, Marcus Smart is an idiot. Will be the maybe that's the article. So Marcus Smart is the new Patrick Beverly, and Patrick Beverly was the new Patrick Beverly this season. So, we talking heads on whatever. But Marcus Smart is talking about how, he's going to shut down Steph Curry. And some people are showing infographics, one of which I found today, which was, saying when Marcus Smart guards Steph Curry, Curry shoots horrendously. And this actually brings up the point that I have been hammering home on defense, which is to say, I think Boston has a great defense. I think the Warriors have a great defense. There is no such thing as a lockdown defender. It just doesn't work. And that's why, it's easy for me to say whenever anybody comes up to James Harden or Nikola Jokic and says they're not an MVP because they're a weakness on defense. It's like, no, the way defense has to work in the NBA when we're not talking things like steals, blocks, and rebounds is it has to be a team scheme. The team has to be on board because you have to have people that are able to switch. You have to have people that are going to be able to guard people that aren't their man. It is not I'm stealing this from Jeremy. I don't know the origin of the quote, but Jeremy Britton, Golden State Warriors super fan. You and him are always jostling on the power rankings for 1 and 2 in a given week, Brian. You did 2 podcasts on the Warriors this week, so you're number 1 for the week, Brian. You're up on the power ratings. But he said it's not 5 games of 1-on-1, it's 1 game of 5-on-5. Because what I looked at is I went and looked at Steph Curry and Marcus Smart's head-to-head numbers. They played 10 games against each other. And first off, a little bit of bad news, Brian. It is 6-4 in favor of the Celtics. So, Celtics are a pretty good team. And I think I saw some numbers too that the Celtics are like the only team in the past 5 years with a plus margin at Golden State of any team in the NBA. So it's in terms of matchup, you were really hoping for the Heat, I would say. So, but it'll make it that more special when you repeat. I think what was it, 1960s was the last time these two teams faced each other, right?
Oh, in the finals? I have no
In the
idea.
finals, it
I wasn't
happened,
around
right?
back then.
Yeah, neither was I. But this has happened before. I think the Warriors and
That makes
Celtics have
sense.
played each other. So, but anyway, I went and looked up their head-to-head numbers, and Steph Curry is a career 24 points per game, 62% true shooter. Amazing. In games against the Celtics with Marcus Smart, he is a 24 points per game player with 63% true shooting. So how the hell are you going to tell me Marcus Smart shuts him down? And in fact, it's even worse because if you're telling me, hey, when Marcus Smart is guarding this guy, he shuts him down. But when Marcus Smart isn't guarding this guy, Steph Curry looks amazing. And Marcus Smart is apparently only able to guard Steph Curry 1/5 of the time. What good is that, right? That doesn't mean anything. And that's in fact my general hatred of, this player is not a good defender. They don't lock down, because that is not how defenses in the NBA work. And conversely, by the way, Marcus Smart actually looks a little worse as a shooter against the Warriors than he does traditionally. And as I already said, he's a bad shooter. He's 51.1% career true shooting. That's horrendous on its own. The Warriors don't need to do anything. In fact, they want Marcus Smart shooting, which is good news because these playoffs, he's been trying a lot of it. And especially against them, they really want that. But this narrative of being able to shut down a player just isn't anything. And the way defenses work is basically by lowering the overall percentages for a squad. I saw someone respond. They said, yeah, Curry's going to get his, but Draymond Green and Klay Thompson look worse. And it's like, yeah, that might be true. But that's the point. There is no such thing as a defender, a Kawhi Leonard, a Marcus Smart, whatever, shutting down their opponent. Even and that was a dig I've seen against Rudy Gobert. They'd be like, oh, Gobert is supposed to be the defensive player of the year, but watch him get, tricked out by Embiid or Jokic or whoever. And it's like, well, that's not his job. His job isn't to shut down one guy. His job is to be a cog in the defense. And oftentimes when you see a player get posterized or look silly, I actually wrote about this with, let's see, I wrote about Russell Westbrook posterizing someone, and then I wrote about Gobert getting posterized. So same play, Russell Westbrook posterizing Gobert. And I noted Gobert got posterized not because he got outplayed by Russell Westbrook. It was because 2 other Celtics or 2 other Jazz, wishful thinking right there, Brian, to have Gobert on the Celtics, that'd be something. But it was having 2 other Jazz players get outplayed first, that then resulted in Gobert being out of position, which resulted in the posterizing dunk. So same thing to Marcus Smart. And by the way, that's good news for you, and hopefully good news for Steph Curry, because if Steph Curry wins a third title and doesn't win a Finals MVP, that will be something ridiculous.
Oh, I'm already penciling in Kevon Looney, the GOAT, as the Finals MVP. But yeah, I mean, it's that's a big concern for the Celtics. If Marcus Smart saying, "Yeah, I'm Defensive Player of the Year, I'm the team leader, I'm going to take a bunch of shots," if that's his mindset, that could be a problem.
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens, and as I keep stressing it, it all comes down to Curry, or not Curry, to Robert Williams' health, and we don't know. So that's my final answer.
Yep.
Thanks for letting me talk a lot, Brian, making up for lost time this season, right? Anything else to end on before we just, I guess, go to shout outs?
No, I'm ready for shout outs.
All right, I actually do have one, Brian, but I'm stalling for time as I look it up.
I'll just shout out Ben Guest then, Ben Guest podcast. We both talked to him this week. It was a lot of fun. Good luck to his Celtics, but not too much good luck in the NBA Finals.
All right, I am going to give a shout out. Yeah, I guess that's rough. I mean, here's the easy answer, what you just said about Ben. Good luck to his Celtics. It's like, if they're his team and he's not even predicting them to win, like, you're under no obligation, right? So if Ben's like,
I just
yeah,
want everyone to be healthy.
We say that a lot on the show. We are never a fan of injuries. So can we just have, it would be really nice to see like Rob Williams get 25 minutes a game, Kevon Looney get 30 minutes a game, have them be the wins produced stars against each other for us saying who deserves MVP. And then of course, like Klay Thompson winning it for like getting the record number of threes in like 2 games or something. So the only thing that would make me unhappy in a healthy finals, and I'm sorry, Brian, I am a petty person, would be if Andrew Wiggins won Finals MVP. I already can't deal with the delusion of people being like, Andrew Wiggins, clearly a good signing. All you people who said this was a horrible signing should look wrong. I'm like, he still isn't worth $30 million. I'm like, you basically like bought a car that was supposed to fall apart and it runs, and you're using it as an excuse. You're like, see, that's like your Ferrari. I'm like, that's like a Honda Civic, which is fine, but you're paying a Ferrari price for a Honda Civic. And by the way, there's absolutely no way that kind of comment will come back to bite me, because, for instance, Brian, in my history, I said Russell Westbrook, people keep comparing him to Michael Jordan, but the reality is he's more like Steve Kerr. Actually, it was worse. I think I said Pippen. So I said people keep comparing Russell Westbrook to Pippen, but the reality is he's more like Steve Kerr. And then he turned into an MVP, and I thought he was an MVP. So I'm looking forward to Finals MVP Andrew Wiggins, who also then goes on to win MVP next season. That is what's going to happen, Brian. And then people will bring up that I called him a Honda Civic, not a Ferrari. So predicting that already. Anyway,
Steve Kerr shot 50% on threes one year. He could be MVP as a player.
Yeah. Well, if we took more, but wasn't that the short and 3 line, if I recall? When
it might have been. Yeah, it probably was.
Yeah, bumper lane MVP. They're going to call it the stupid Mickey Mouse. The Mickey Mouse title for 2020, which is bullshit, and I disagree with. I'm calling it like the bumper lane. Yeah, I'm going to start responding. I'm going to start responding with MJ's finals being the bumper lane finals, and people are going to keep calling LeBron James bubble the bubble playoff. Thanks, Brian. All right. The shout out I have is to John Nunn, a chess player I just learned about this week. He is an English grandmaster. At his peak, reached top 10 in the world, number 9 in 1985. He is a 3-time world chess champion puzzle solver. So not world chess champion, but he's a good writer. But his key is he was actually was an amazing mathematician. And this is very interesting. I'm going to give you a compliment he got from Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, arguably the greatest chess player ever. So Magnus Carlsen, talking about John Nunn. I am convinced that the reason the Englishman John Nunn never became world champion is that he is too clever for that. He has so incredibly much in his head, simply too much. His enormous powers of understanding and his constant thirst for knowledge distracted him from chess. So he's like, and by the way, this is a good point about like really strong chess players. It's like, if you're really amazing at chess and could maybe be like Magnus Carlsen, who makes, millions playing chess, you could probably make that money elsewhere with how smart you are. So anyway, John Nunn, huge shout out.
Good shout out.
All right. Well, go Warriors, go Celtics, go health. I'm gonna steal yours. Go health, Brian. And we'll hopefully regroup at the end of the NBA Finals to talk about what happened and who deserves the rightful MVP.